Now, I honestly can't tell you how excited I am to do this video because I've been wanting to do it all week. But anyway, what we're going to do today is we're going to do Universal Dashboard or PowerShell Universal Dashboard on a Ubuntu Linux machine. So first of all, if you haven't already installed PowerShell, this is how you would go about it. You use the snap installation on the 19.04. Mostly because 19.04 isn't really in any other documentation or repositories that you will find on Microsoft, but the snap install does work. So, since we already have PowerShell installed, I'll just go ahead and start it up. And what we're going to do first of all is we're going to install the PowerShell Universal Dashboard module. Now, I'm going to use the Community Edition, so I'm going to do the install-module Universal Dashboard .community. Relatively self-explanatory in the name there. And once that's done, we're going to go ahead and try to configure an API just to show you what can be done as an example. And then later on we're going to cover a few more examples. So this is going to go ahead and download the module now, and that's going to take a few more seconds. Now once that's installed, we're going to do a quick import module, because although we've downloaded it, we haven't imported it, so it's not available necessarily in memory, therefore we can't do anything with it. So we'll just do a import module, and again, same thing as before, the name of the module, so universal dashboard.community. Interestingly enough, if you were working with the licensed version, it would just be Universal Dashboard. There's no .community, and if you're even configuring that way, there is a limitation that you need to restart it once an hour. So if you're working with really the existing licensed version, but you just need to test something quickly, then honestly you can work with the allowance, I think, of 1 hour. Anyway, our module has now been imported, so we can go ahead and start doing some fun stuff, let's call it. So what we're going to do in this particular instance is use a get API call. So we're going to create a new endpoint. We're going to call that endpoint process, and we're going to use the get, and then we're going to get the processes from this. Now, for those of you who have perhaps looked at the documentation, you'll see that we're just basically following along with the documentation of Universal Dashboard, but I want to prove to you that it works perfectly fine under Linux, because most of the documentation always uses the Windows example. So here we can now see that we've started our REST endpoint, and we've got a response. Now what I want to do is go ahead and get the response, but from the perspective of the URL. So we're going to use the invoke REST method to get the response, and as you can see, we now have a lovely response which shows all of the processes as per what we would expect to see, with name and ID filtered out. So that was one example of what can be done. Now, for those of you who haven't gone all the way through, you might want to use the get UD REST API, and then use the pipe to use the stop UD REST API to be able to stop and start the code as and when you want. So now we can see that we've successfully stopped our REST API. Now another example would be to use proper forms. Now here we're going to have a nice little function that will just check some values, and we're going to have a full-blown form with a validate at the end of it, and we're going to start that as a dashboard. Now the reason I want to do this is I want to show you the different types of input method you can use. So we've got a validate method, we've got a validate string method, so we've basically got one of every option, if you will. So we're going to go ahead and run that and then look at how it looks in a browser. So we're going to start our dashboard. So, and again, very much like the endpoints for the APIs, you can stop and start using the get and the stop and start dashboard command. But let's just go have a look how it looks at the moment, and then we'll go from there later. So here I have a simple server request form. So the first part of it here is using a drop down, so it's a multi-select value. We have a simple boolon, which here is the yes no, so that is represented as a tick box in the form. We have a simple text string here with no validation. And then we have another drop down with some multiple values just to give it a little bit of variety here. And last but not least, we have a check script value. So this is where we can actually have a string value, but we're going to run and execute the function that we had earlier to validate if the input is correct. So first of all, there's no Bob in our value, so if we put Bob in, yep, doesn't validate. And we only really have the users Adam and Eve, so if I put Adam in, oh look, it validates fine. Next we have a nice little value for redirect, so that'll just pop up with a message saying your request was submitted. That could be a far more complex form, but for demonstration purposes, it gives you an idea what you could achieve relatively easily.